Hello and welcome to the Southbound Sports Show. I'm your host, Richie Leahy, here with my co-host, Maddie B. If you're watching the video, we got a little bit of a change this week as we have our own mock draft up on the board. And so we're going to go through just basically Steeler scenarios coming in. Matt, we'll start with your number one pick. Who did you take and why?
Well, the clear number one, Najee Harris. With where Pittsburgh is, if he falls to them, I've been saying since day one, I will be extremely disappointed if they don't take someone with his caliber, because he can physically run and he can be an asset in the passing game. So I think he totally makes sense there.
So the NFL draft database or mock draft database, they've compiled all the mock drafts that are out there, and Najee Harris is the consensus number one pick from most of the sites. And I guess they go through and they have like 153 sites that they pulled together to get their data, including like Sports Illustrated, and then even like local newspapers like the Inquirer, and then the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. So Harris being number one, they also have Travis Etienne as a high with a mix of a bunch of other players. So if one of those two players, do you think running back is the position they go instead of defense like they've been going in the past couple of drafts?
Well, I think that it's tough to say, because they're with drafting at 24, they have a tough spot where if they want one of the defensive players, probably one of the only ones that would be available that to me I would be interested in is Asante Samuel. And I think that at that pick, it's a little bit of a reach to go for a cornerback there. To me, I think you solidify the run game, and that kind of solves some of the other problems down the road for you.
And I agree. I think with the way the running game hasn't developed, and we went through this mock draft together a few weeks. It feels like we've been talking about it for a month now. But I kind of have the same mindset where you try to get someone that can make an impact, possibly on offense, because worst case scenario, running backs last maybe 3 years in the league. If you can get a guy that's dynamic, even if you get higher, like as a high pick, get some weapons on the offense. I think with everyone drafting quarterbacks this year, it's not a good draft for the Steelers to get a quarterback late in the first round, because whenever we go back through and we look at, okay, these are the quarterbacks, a lot of them have been successful coming in like the teens of the first round. Well, guess what? Those guys, everyone seems like they're trading up, and that teen quarterback is now going to be like the third or fifth pick overall. And so you're not going to have that option to say like, oh, this guy fell to us. Like Aaron Rodgers fell to us. Like, no, that's not going to happen. Everyone is talking about getting a quarterback. Even the 49ers have talked about it. Like Garoppolo just has to sit there and think like, they must really hate me. Like he must wake up and think that every day. Like they're trying to get rid of him. Can't get rid of him. They've been talking about it. Now I saw an article where people were talking about how they're interested in Justin Fields and how he might be the steal of the draft. And it's like, all right, why? Like, why? If it goes Trevor Lawrence, who is to Zach Wilson is what the rumor is, and then like Justin Fields, or if they go a different direction.
Well, and that's the crazy thing, is that it's completely uncontested that Wilson is to the Jets.
Maybe not. Jets doing Jets things would draft him. But they could also trade and do some other crazy things. So it's like, all right, well, if you're taking all these quarterbacks off so early, yeah, that's where you're going to get your value pick, where that third or fourth quarterback off the board was the guy. That was like the Ben Roethlisberger guy that the Steelers could get in that time slot later. So they've asked them, are the Steelers going to trade up? They've basically said no. And I don't think you do. Like, I think you just wait and see who falls to you. I'm fine with either running back. I like Harris. I think he's probably a little bit better than Etienne, but who knows? I could be wrong. And if ETN gets drafted first to a different team, or if the Steelers end up taking him, we'll see which one has a better career. But I don't think you can go wrong with either pick. The only other position that I've seen consistently, and I mentioned it a few weeks ago, they let Bud Dupree walk. Do they go with a defensive end or an edge rusher, maybe an outside linebacker type deal? But looking at the rankings, we went through it, and even some of the people that have mock drafts and they're picking an edge rusher, I think they have a bunch of reaches. Like, we went through the big board of all the most talented players, and a lot of the defensive ends people have the Steelers picking in the first round would be such a reach that it's crazy. Like, I think the only one is if Michigan's Kwity Paye comes out, which we know he's raw. ESPN has been hitting his story hard. I know he mentioned that last week, how they always go through like the public interest stories. But did you see that they had him as their cover story for a few days?
No.
Yeah, I think he came over from Africa with his mother. Let's see. I have the story up. I can't remember. So I think he was one of the stories where he kind of came over as a refugee, and he was brought in, and like whenever they come in, you don't have a lot of football experience. So him getting a scholarship, I would consider it kind of as a reach, almost like he has the raw talent. And that's kind of what the NFL is looking at him. But in that defensive end position, sometimes that works out. You see guys taking all the time that they're like, they have all the skills, but they might not have like the technique or whatever. They can teach that in the NFL. So to be honest, I like when they draft Michigan guys on the Steelers. It makes it easy for me to cheer for them. So I wouldn't be down if that ended up being their pick. Plus, he's going to learn with T.J. Watt, so that'd be a hell of a deal. But I think that's the only other name that I saw on a bunch of mock drafts. I think a lot of the other ones, when they pick, if they think that Kwity Paye is going to go earlier, there's no need for the Steelers to reach. Like, don't reach for a defensive end. I'd be very disappointed whenever you know that there's a clear drop off in terms of talent and potential, I think, in that position. So everyone else, I saw one of them, I don't want to knock the guy, but they're like, oh, it would be ecstatic if so-and-so fell to them at 24. It's like, he's not even any mock drafts in the first round. Why would they be pumped? Like, it'd just be a reach. If anyone else at defensive end that's not named Kwity Paye, it would be a disappointment for me. What do you think?
I think that's pretty fair. I'm going to defer to you on that because I really didn't watch a lot of Michigan last year, but I would say that that's probably a safe pick. For as much as I give you grief about Michigan, they do turn out the players. So I don't think that it would be a bad fit.
Defense, Matt, is always safe. It's whenever you get the quarterbacks from Michigan, they never really pan out. Some of the other skill players, not so good either. So offensive line and defensive guys, I think if you're going to pick, Michigan's as good a school as any in the draft. And they put a ton of guys in the NFL anyway in terms of draft picks. So, but like I said, I would like to see them get an offensive option. If they go the defensive route, please be someone that has high upside. Don't waste a first-round pick on a reach just because you see a need and you're just going to check that box. And they haven't been doing that in the past, so that's why I'm surprised to see a lot of mock drafts. Like I said, there were 100 or something of them compiled onto that site. So just looking through and seeing some of the names, it's like, why?
Well, that's why I felt like Najee Harris is really a no-brainer, or to even have the 1B ETN. That, like, if one of those two guys are there, you have to take them. Like, that's clearly an upgrade over what you already have.
Plus, you let Connor walk, and I think in terms of talent, you're going to let a more athletic guy come in, and that was one of my knocks on him. Like, not that he wasn't going to ever work out in the NFL, but like James Conner, if you don't have that type of athleticism, you got to at least be able to hit the hole and make the read and just try to get a couple yards. There were some times where I felt like he tried to be Le'Veon Bell too much, but he didn't have that explosiveness. So it looked like, oh, that's going to be a big hole, and it was constantly getting tackled, constantly getting tripped up, and to me that was just frustrating. And then you would see his yards per carry, and you're like, 2 yards per carry or whatever it was, 3 yards per carry, like not good. So I'd be fine going running back, and I think it would work out just because of where they're drafting. And since everyone's going quarterback crazy, you could end up getting the top running back in the draft at that spot. Let's get into your second pick. You picked Landon Dickerson. And I also mentioned him. I think I picked him when we were going through the draft anyway at that position. But they gave you a C plus. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's because he was injured, and coming off of that injury, I think leaves some question marks for people. But to see the way, like after he got injured and the response that the Alabama players had, like clearly he had respect in the locker room from those guys. And I think for as much as we talk about culture and having team type guys, I think he's a natural. He checks both of those boxes. Not to mention having the uh, the chance to fill the void left by Pouncey. There's going to be gaping holes on the line, and he put a ridiculous amount of size on that. I think he'd be a plug and play.
And that's where I think when I was talking about him, it's just a big name, a big guy. And if you're able to get him just because of an injury, it's like, okay, why not? And maybe that's a reach. Maybe they can get him in the third round. Awesome. Like that's a position of need. And you know that if you're going to be able to get one of the top guys, I think if that ended up happening, you're going to have familiarity with Najee Harris running behind him. So you're getting some of that continuity coming up to the NFL, guys that can keep each other accountable and motivate each other. So I would be all for that. I think the other interesting name that stood out to me going through the mock drafts for this position is Asante Samuel from Florida State. And we both talked about him a few weeks ago. I'm looking at the Sporting News because their draft is kind of similar to ours, but with just a little bit of a different twist. So in their second round, they have him grabbing Samuel, and I think that would be a good consolation prize. And to be honest, I think they might even be able to nab him and then get Dickerson in the third round because they're picking again at 87. And maybe that's where they do trade up a little bit to make sure they get both guys. But if they were able to get those three players, I think that would be an A plus draft for me before any of the other fill in late picks. What do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, if you cash in those three picks, I think that in itself continues to build on the success that they've had. And you see what happens when teams have like to hit those three picks just alone. Not even if you throw every other pick away, but you nail those three and you get high productive players that it can have lasting effects on a team to hit three really good players in one draft.
And they did cut Steven Nelson. So I could see them taking cornerback higher. But like let's say you land all three and you get two of the three to work out, like that's an excellent draft. Most people don't, or most teams don't get that type of production from their top couple picks. But if you're going to go get positions of need, and I think you'd hammer all three right there, and then get guys that can step in and are dynamic enough to play, I think that would be a great draft. Now, yours, you had them nabbing another running back, Michael Carter from North Carolina. Why'd you grab another running back?
Honestly, I looked at the way that Pittsburgh drafts, and a lot of times they go for best player available. Now I know probably for them at this point they're looking someone defensively, but with the safeties and corners that were available, I just wasn't crazy about them. And I think I will continue to pound on this drum that you have to have a consistent run game. And maybe and I when I say running game, I don't just necessarily mean turn around and hand the ball off 40, 50 times to like a Derrick Henry type guy. But I'm thinking use him in the passing game, use him to create mismatches, flex him out into a slot, bring him back in, do some different things, force teams to have to play coverage. And I think when you look at how well uh, North Carolina was able to do that, Michael Carter fit that bill as a guy that could do that for him. So I think if he's available, why not just take that risk? Double down on it.
I do like how if you are going for a pure rebuild, give your offense some options, and that way, like, you're not putting all your eggs in one basket, and you're getting two guys that, I mean, they had both North Carolina running backs as like two of the top five, so you're going to get two of the top five running backs in the same draft. Go for it. You're just going to see if it actually pans out. Sticking with the sporting news, they had a different Michigan guy, Cam McGrone, which we also talked about, filling that linebacker spot, just coming in. And I don't want to say that third round would be kind of a reach for him, but I know you're basing it off of how well Devin Bush has played. He's not as dynamic of an athlete as Devin Bush, and I would be excited if the Steelers got him. But I honestly think wait and see if he falls to the fourth round. I don't really think that it would be. I don't want to say it's a great pick at third. I think it would be an okay pick, but just getting him because he plays a similar like scheme in college as Devin Bush, I don't think is reason enough to grab a guy in the third round. When I think if you're able to get some other help, like I would almost go offense, 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 especially if you end up taking like the defensive end in that first round, then you almost have to get a center and a running back in with your other two picks. Because like with their draft here, they're going, or no, they're not the ones that had the other defensive end in the first round. So that would be their first defensive pick, or no, second because they had Ashanti Samuel. So I'm not down on McGrone, but I will say that I think a lot of it was just him playing. I don't want to say like he's just a smart player, not as athletic as some of the other linebackers that are available. And I know the Steelers like to play with a lot of like the athleticism, letting them do their own thing. So I'm not saying he wouldn't be a fit, and I just don't think that they would take him in the third round. Sorry, sporting news. Your first two picks are on point, but I don't know. Now, you don't even have going in, you don't even have any linebackers. You're going right to tight end with Tommy Tremble from Notre Dame. Go ahead. What are your thoughts on that? And if you want to hit on the linebacker position, go ahead.
Well, I do think that linebackers are a need, and I'm wondering with some of the guys that are in free agency, once the draft's finished and they have a better sense of uh, what's going to be available, if they don't end up signing, pick up some guys in free agency that can fill some holes. So one of the things that I liked with Tommy Tremble is that he was an athletic guy that he could potentially play. He could be in line as the tight end, but then he can also be moved around a bit. And it seemed like Pittsburgh seems to go more like they don't use a true fullback, which I think he fits in that role where he could be that blocking back, that blocking H back, trying to see like where they fit. And I think that he would be more weapons for Roethlisberger because he's been missing that tight end target.
And shifting a little bit to a different draft, some of them, like just picking one here, they're going more of a wide receiver option and not even worrying about the tight end position. And so I almost wonder if that's a route that they're going to go. I mean, just looking at the tight end with Ebron, I think he's coming back this year. But he had so many looks from Roethlisberger, they're comfortable. You can pick up a blocking tight end later. So I'm just wondering what direction the Steelers are going to go. And I almost think that they will lean for a wide receiver because I don't think Juju will be back after next year. Like they signed that 1-year deal. It's almost like a stopgap. Like, hey, let's see how you do, but we're not giving you a long-term deal. Like, what are you talking about, dude? Like, we're not helping you out. So you got to come out and show. Like when we talked about Bud Dupree signing that one deal, we're like, oh yeah, that's not going to work out. And then he came out and played awesome because he knew it was a contract year. So is Juju going to be able to do that? I don't know. The big problem with the Steelers is they had a lot of drops, but I wonder how much of that had to do with just how many times they threw the ball because they couldn't run it. So I don't know. That'll be the other thing. Now, getting away from other drafts because we're already burning through time here, and I don't want to go super long this week. You had chipped them back to the linebacker. I was kind of surprised that they rated your pick as a C+2 in the 4th round, getting Davis, the linebacker out of Kentucky. Did they give you any reason why they rated that lower? Was it just a reach of a guy?
Honestly, I don't know. I saw that it was that they weren't as high with him, but the thing that jumped out to me was that he had the speed to play in space, and I think that's one of the things that with Pittsburgh's defense, the faster guys are, with Devin Bush flying around, last year with Bud Dupree, as they got younger and they got faster, they played better, and it seemed like towards the tail end of Harrison's time, he was so slow that he ended up just really just being a primary pass rusher.
Yeah.
And they really didn't have to use him. So I think you can have guys like that, but I don't know that you have the bulk of your defense be run first thumpers when it's a pass first league.
And that's true. I mean, it was the same thing I had with McGrone, and I wonder if he's even going to fall that far. Because he's not as dynamic. I mean, he's a solid linebacker, and I think it would be a much better pick if they got him here in the 4th round because they have so many 4th round picks. Go for it. I'm just wondering if they were drafting it and saying like, okay, we're going to rate it lower because it's not really a position of need for the Steelers. But then that kind of stuck out to me because then you had Ian Book from Notre Dame, the quarterback, with the next round, and they rated that an A+ or an A- maybe. I can't really see. So I don't understand getting a quarterback that late unless you're super lucky and get Tom Brady. I don't think any quarterback at that rate is worth an A. I think you just be like a C or a B the rest of the way out because you don't know. They're kind of unknowns. You're not going to get that top talent late in the draft, but maybe that's what they're looking at. I still almost wonder if they're going to get my guy Kyle Trask, Matt.
I hope not.
Why not?
It's plausible. I think he will be around at some point, but
because everyone keeps talking about how all of these quarterbacks are going to go. No one's mentioning him. The only team that I've seen bring him up, the New England Patriots, Matt. So if the Patriots and Belichick are high on the guy, it's probably a good option for the Steelers too.
But they also have the draft capital that they could potentially move up and draft one of the more coveted quarterbacks, whether it be Jones or Fields or Lance.
See, my only knock against Ian Book, and I know that they beat Clemson this year without Trevor Lawrence, but it seemed like every time they were in a big game, he didn't really show up. So it's like, all right, great. He came to Michigan last year, or I guess 2 years ago now. I forget. We're already in the next year. Big time game. That gets absolutely destroyed. He couldn't move the ball at all against Michigan's defense, and they end up losing 40-something to whatever. And then I know he was kind of injured on and off, and so maybe that's why he's falling in the draft. But then you get to the ACC championship game, They're like, this is your chance right here. Can you go to the national championship or the playoffs at least? Like if they would have kept it close, there was a concern that Notre Dame was going to take one of those spots and them and Clemson would both be in. But then they just got destroyed. It's like, okay. All right. Well, nice to see you. All right. Were they in the playoffs? Well, I don't even remember what happened last year.
Well, and while you're looking that up, I think to give a little bit of a justification, I think at that point, taking someone like Book and burying them on the bench isn't a bad thing because you have Roethlisberger on the tail end of his career, and you're not 100% sure what you're going to do as far as your backups. So I think it's okay to have him drafted knowing that you could completely go in a separate direction within the next 2 years. Because you have someone like Marcus Mariota that would still be younger, that would hit free agency from the Raiders, that you'd be able to sign in free agency that could be someone that if you take them and you're not really seeing the production that you want, it's almost like a no harm, no foul type situation because you draft them late. If he pans out, great. If he doesn't, it doesn't hurt you.
That's true. And I was just trying to find, and they did play in the playoffs last year. I forgot all about that. They got killed by Alabama. They only scored 14 points. I'm trying to see if I can actually find the stats. Notre Dame's website just had his awards under his statistics, so that wasn't really helping me out. But I almost wonder, like, whenever he played in big games, like, what were his stats? Like Alabama, no touchdowns and interception. All right, he almost threw 70% completion, but that doesn't mean anything if they're just throwing screens the entire time. Same exact line almost for Clemson. Like, is he not hitting down the field? Is he not making reads? Like, how are you hitting 70% for completion, but not like only averaging 5 yards of completion? Like, that's on the quarterback. Like, he's not getting the ball downfield, not seeing it in these big time games. I mean, the rest of them, let's be honest, they had a pretty easy schedule this year, focusing only on the worst of the ACC. I think their next best game was like the Tar Heels, where he threw one touchdown. That was it. So, like, that's his entire career. I think he's more of just a check down guy. I don't see any upside drafting him over just like, I mean, you already went in on Haskins. You have Mason Rudolph. Like, let's see what happens. But, yeah, the Michigan game last year was the one. I'm bringing it up. He only completed 32% of his passes, Matt. 32%.
Oh.
And so, like, in terms of going in, and I know it was raining, Michigan scored 45 points. It wasn't like a rainy game that ended up 14-10. Like, Michigan was moving the ball, and they were just crushing them. So, like, that's the game that stood out to me where if you're Notre Dame, you're playing a Michigan team that has the NFL talent on defense, as we've seen in the draft. Same with, like, the Clemson's and Alabama's. They played Georgia and lost. He threw 2 picks against them. He didn't have any interceptions even against Michigan. But it's the same thing where if you're averaging like 5 yards a completion and you're only completing 32% of your passes, like, you're not going anywhere. So I'm just looking through a lot of high interception games. I feel like I'm just bashing the guy now, but he's only 6 foot tall. I'm just surprised that they ranked that as an A. That's all I'm saying. And I probably spent way too much time talking about it. If they drafted him, all right, let's see what he can bring in practice. And is he going to be competitive? Because I think that's what the Steelers need. They need a guy that can come in and push the competition and not just be in awe of Ben and saying, like, I'm going to learn from this guy. He's going to be in the Hall of Fame, because at any point we've seen he could be injured. And then you need a bunch of guys that can back him up. So I wouldn't even be surprised if they didn't draft the quarterback. And to be honest, I don't even think they should. Because you already took, like, your draft pick was Haskins this year. That's how I feel about it. And so that's why I wouldn't even pick one. Pick another lineman. Lineman.
I like that instead.
And so that's what you have next. Herring from BYU at guard. I saw some people had a couple of drafts had a couple of Georgia linemen and some other ones. Like, I don't even care who it is when you're getting this late in the draft. And then your last pick was the center from Penn State, Monet, which they gave a C plus. And I almost wonder if they gave you a C plus on those because you drafted two centers, and that also brought down Dickerson's rating. Because, like, to me, just get linemen. Like, if you're going to go with the two running back like you did, awesome. You're going to get some guys out there that can move the ball, but I would be 100% focused on, because I don't want to sound negative because it's super early and the Steelers were undefeated last year going like into the deep into the season. The Steelers could come out and just have an awful year. Ben could be hurt, and it could almost be like the year before where Rudolph and they were like 500 or whatever. This time, the wheels could fall off. So why not just draft like you're starting fresh? Get your running back. Get a bunch of linemen. Get some defensive help. And then use that. Like, there's no need. You have so many picks already. Why try to trade up, which everyone keeps saying, like, trade up, trade up. The Steelers are not close to a Super Bowl. I hate to say it, but they're not. When you haven't won a playoff game in however many years, I mean, you've been going into the playoffs favored, and you haven't been able to win. They're not close. Now is the time to rebuild. Like I said, you did the free agent quarterback. Don't draft one. Draft other guys and get assets in and try to get your team younger. Because if Ben steps away next year, like, even if he gets hurt in the middle of the year or whatever, he's not coming back. Like, would you come back if it was another late season meltdown where you're undefeated and then you start to fall apart because you just can't handle it anymore? Like, at some point, you're going to Drew Brees it, where you're just like, I'm going to try to come back, but deep down, like, there's no chance I'm done. They would almost have to platoon me with, like, Hill. That's had to be what Drew Brees is thinking. Like, I can't take that many throws or that many hits. They would almost have to play half the season without me, have me come in and get ready for playoffs, and that would be my season. But Ben's not going to do that. So that's my final thoughts on the mock draft. What are yours, Matt?
Overall, I'm excited to see what Pittsburgh does, because I know obviously their draft is going to look entirely different than mine. I would be surprised if they moved up or down. Overall, I think that they can sit still and still find really good quality players. One of the things that I was thinking about, like, we were talking about running backs, and when you look at someone like Harris or Etienne, you might like Michael Carter or the other North Carolina running back more. But it kind of, like, I was thinking back to seeing a thing about the Pittsburgh Steelers wide receivers in the 70s. The draft that they picked up, Swan and Stallworth, they liked Stallworth better, but they're like, if we wait, like, Stallworth is coming from USC. He's a more recognizable player. He's not going to be available later on, so we have to go Swan first and hope that no one drafts Stallworth until later. And I think there is some of that happening too, where you're like, well, if I pass on, say, Najee Harris and I go after a running back or linebacker first, am I going to have that type of player around in a later round? The chances are the answer is no, unless you trade back up into the first round or late first round or second round.
And that could be where someone reaches and gets Harris because he's the best running back on the board, and then they end up getting Kwity Paye or someone else because they say, like, all right, we can get our running back now in the second round. Let's go with the best guy on the board. Because I think that's where everyone has Kwity Paye slotted, and I think that's why a lot of mock drafts had him going so high to the Steelers, just because they let go of Bud Dupree. But you don't know who's going to take what positions. Maybe someone ahead of you needs a defensive end, so they grab him. And then someone grabs Harris, and then if Etienne's gone, what do you get? Like, then you're just sitting there And that's where I think you can get some of the off-the-wall picks. But like always, it'll be exciting. I think the more quarterbacks taken in the first round ahead of the Steelers, the better the draft will be for the Steelers. Because like I said, they don't need a quarterback. Let all those other teams get quarterbacks early, and then all the other positions will kind of just be shoved back. And then that's where maybe then you make a move up because some of the other positions are available, and maybe someone needs a quarterback, so they're like, hey, we're looking to move up to get so-and-so quarterback. Everyone's talking about it. The Steelers make that call and get a few more picks and then get some high-value guys later. And so I just want them to get positions of need. I wouldn't be surprised if the first-round pick was someone that no one expects. I know a lot of the mock drafts, and we didn't even look at them before we did our previous shows. We were trying to go into it fresh, and it's I don't want to say it's like awesome to see us being on the same page, because that doesn't mean anything. It just means that like we know who the players are coming out that are going to be good, or at least we think would be good based on their college production. We know what positions of need there are. So let's see what happens. But it's going to be the later ones where I think that they could have some big name guys fall to them. And like you said, get a guy that's available now. Maybe they go to running backs. Maybe they don't. Maybe they go to centers. You can always move a center around the tackle. Landon Dickerson was getting pretty big. Like I said, I think I talked about that before. Maybe they move him to guard or tackle. He's injured. Oh, well, who cares if he plays center? So that's it. Do you have anything else for the mock draft for the Steelers going into the big deal on Thursday?
Nope.
I think it's still on Thursday, right? Or do they do the first round earlier now?
Oh, I want to say the first round was Thursday, but I could be mistaken now.
Yeah, it is Thursday. So round one's Thursday. Because I know they kept moving them around. So I did have one other thing for the NFL, and that is Lamar Jackson. So there's some rumors swirling around the Baltimore Ravens right now. I don't know if you saw these, that Lamar Jackson's fifth-year option has to be picked up by Monday. Why haven't they picked it up? Like John Harbaugh comes out and he guaranteed that the Ravens will pick it up. That means nothing. Like, who cares what John Harbaugh says? He's not the GM. How many other times has a coach come out and spoken in defense of his player only to know, like, behind closed doors that it's not happening? And the rumor was that they've heard from Baltimore's camp that they were giving him a 4-year chance, and then they were going to let him graduate, which was their term, and let him go to a different team, and they would know if he has whatever it takes to get them to the next level. But he hasn't won a playoff game. I mean, Ben hasn't either in that same time frame. So what do? Do they trade up and get one of these other guys? Like, how crazy would that be if Baltimore ends up being one of the teams that does something totally out of left field, because everyone thinks that they're set for the future at quarterback? So for this to come, it's not just a rumor, Matt. Like, they're considering it. So what do you think on that?
No, they're not.
You think he's there? You think he's guaranteed that he's going to be there for a long time?
Why would you play chicken with that, though, knowing that on the open market he's going to command a gazillion dollars?
Matt, his salary jumps from 1.7 last year to 23.1 million. So, or I guess the 1.7 is this year. The 23.1 million is for next year. So, like, they don't have to sign that option if they think his production is not going to match. Like, they have him for this year no matter what. Just to throw that confusion out there. The fifth year would be like the next year. I think they have to do it by Monday. Otherwise, like Matt's saying, he hits the salary cap free agent or whatever. So everyone assumes that the salary cap's going to raise. Will some teams come out and start bidding high for quarterbacks? His salary that he's going to make, the 23.1, is tied for the fifth highest with Josh Allen from the Buffalo Bills. So do you think he's a top 5 quarterback?
Yes,
So you would pay for that
I would.
because we've seen it
And
before. When a team starts putting a lot of their salary into their quarterback, the team doesn't
oh,
do well in the playoffs.
and I say that knowing that there's $100 million quarterback sitting in Pittsburgh right now.
Yeah,
That,
and they haven't done shit, Matt. It's been like
but
a decade, dude. It's been over a
but
decade, right? 20,
but I
90.
don't know. But I don't know that you're going to sign him to $100 million contract. So I think there is some wiggle room. There's not a lot, but I think you're right. You don't handcuff your team with one player.
And there's no guarantee that, like, if he likes Baltimore, maybe he knows that they're guaranteed for the long term with him. And they're telling him, like, hey, hit the open market, but we're going to give you a long term deal, like a 10-year, like, remember what they did with Patrick Mahomes, like the 10-year deal or whatever that he's been restructuring to get more guaranteed money up front? Like, they could just make an offer like that to him and say, like, all right, cool. You want this 23 million. How about we do you better and we give you a 10-year deal where you're going to make 100 million or whatever instead, guaranteed. Like, I think he would take that. Like, I think anyone would take that. Like, that's a no-brainer, especially a running quarterback. Everyone's like thinking he's going to get hurt eventually. So,
Well, I think that when you have a quarterback like Jackson, that he has that element that he can just break down and take off. I just saw an old clip today of Cordell Stewart came on my timeline on Twitter. That when you have a quarterback like that that has the ability to break the pocket and rip off a long run, it changes the way people have to play defense. They have to have a spy over him to try to keep him somewhat contained. And I, I personally, if I have the choice, would like that option to have a running quarterback. 'Cause I think it gives you something different to make teams have to prepare for.
hey, he's only 24. They said that he's won more games than any other quarterback since he's been the starter, but he just hasn't performed in the playoffs. They've also outscored every other team the past 2 years since he's been the starter. But you never know. Some teams are crazy, man. Like, I don't
Well,
think
and
the
I think too, when you look at what Baltimore's done in the playoffs, I don't know 100% how much of that is him versus how much is it the game planning that they're forcing him into these tighter boxes. They're not getting the yardage in the early downs to put teams in a bind. And they're playing competitive down the stretch. They're playing that traditional Baltimore style where rely on your defense and try not to turn the ball over on offense. But I think with them being overly conservative, trying to get over that stigma, that it's hurting them.
and Harbaugh gets really conservative, just like his brother. Get into a big game, you're gonna shit the bed.
Let's just kick a field goal.
So it's like, all right, what are you doing? At some point, you gotta let it rip, and
Yep.
it's probably better if they don't do that. But I don't know. We'll see what happens. Like I said, some teams are crazy. So, like, if they trade up and get a quarterback in the first round, I think a lot of eyebrows are going to be raised and be like, "What the hell are you doing?" Like, if you didn't sign that deal, and then Monday rolls around and they still don't sign it, and they had already drafted another first round quarterback, then I think it'd be even more suspicious. But I was just kind of baiting around the first time I brought it up. But I do think that they're going to sign like a more longer term deal with him. So, like, a lot of people are playing like, oh, if they don't sign that, they're crazy. It's like, nah, just let it go and try to offer him something bigger. Like, he doesn't have to hit the free agent market if he's confident in the team. You know what I mean? Some people like to get their value, but they've already tailored the offense to you. Everyone loves you there. Take a Mahomes deal. Like, why not? That'd be my look. if I was him. You have anything else for the NFL getting into the draft stuff?
No, not so much.
All right, finally, once the draft's over, Matt, then we'll actually have like game talk going. We'll get out of all the hypotheticals. We'll know who they have on the team, what the moves are going to be, what the team's going to look like. Confidence. Right now, my confidence still around a 500 ball club. Like it's not that they lost so much, but like just losing some key pieces on defense and not really doing anything free agent wise because of the cap to make up for that. The draft better boost that for me. Because if they get some big key time players where you get some rookies coming in and making some big time plays, then I'd be excited. But we'll see if it happens. The last topic, something that I was trying to spend at least a good bit of time on, is college football playoff expansion. And I wanted to read this to you because I put it on the board, but there were a couple different things. As I talk about this, I wanted to bring something else up too. But the College Football Playoff Committee says they're looking at 63 different outcomes or something crazy, and which include sticking at 4 teams, which we know is not going to work. Because when the viewers start to go down, something will change. So they know that they need to make a change. They're looking at a 16 playoff, 8, 10, 12, and going right to 16, which I'm all for the 16-team playoff. And it also sparked another debate where we talked about last week, the Super League in Europe. The soccer league, they all came together. A bunch of the teams from England, they pulled out. And then a bunch of the Italian teams pulled out. So it was only the 2 Spanish teams, but they said the deal's still alive the last I've seen. Maybe that's changed in the past day or two. I haven't seen an update on it, but they're still trying to do it. And like I said, I like the idea. Because if you're trying to make soccer the global game, why not go for it? But now with like all the revenue streams in college football, they're wondering maybe if you just have a super league in college football. Because right now everyone's been waiting for like the top couple leagues to just pull away and form their own mini NFL. But for that to happen, there's too many politics in college football. Because like if Michigan leaves, Michigan State is right there in the legislative whatever. They'd write something up where they have to take them. Like the little brother everyone always jokes about. Like that's a real thing. Like Oklahoma, guess who's going to be right there? Oklahoma State's not going to be left out. So it gets a little bit more complex than saying like, oh, we're going to pick the top 32 teams and that's going to be the new college football Bull division or whatever the hell they call it. Because Bulls would be eliminated because they're dumb as it is right now. And I'll go on record with that. Bulls are a waste of time and they're not even good. Coaches say they're good for practice. I think that's a farce. So that's my thing. What do you think, Matt, before I get into some of these extra details of playoff expansion and possibility of more of like a super type league?
I mean, all things considered, I'm kind of seeing the way that the FCS playoffs are working, and I'm kind of okay with it because we've talked, and I know at one point I said I liked 4, just because within the top 4, there's no wiggle room as to who the top. Like I would say, that with the top 4 teams that they put into the playoffs, I feel like for the most part you're getting the top 4 teams. Like you get between 4 and 5 where there's a little bit of speculation, but when it comes time to play your national championship game, there's not a this team played, but they really didn't deserve to be there. Like you're playing somebody, and yeah, you've had some like Oklahoma blowouts, and you had some Notre Dame blowouts along the way. But I still feel like at the end of the day, when it came time to pick those games, like you were like, this is one of the 4 best. But as I look at the FCS playoffs, and they have it at 16, I think we're playing. NCAA is playing a lot of bowl games that people say are meaningless and players are opting out. So you want to make it meaningful. If you have 16, now you're getting your Power Fives are definitely getting in. When you have an SEC or a Big Ten that's saying, well, we have two or three teams that are highly qualified and should be in, you have enough space that in a year where you have multiple teams within the conference that can play, you have the justification to say, okay, you have your at-larges, you have your guarantees. Now you have some extra spots that you can compensate for. Like the year that Michigan and Ohio State went down, like we're rounding out the Big Ten, that you knew that was going to be your 1-2 match. That you have a little bit more to go with.
And I mean, getting into just the expansion, like at first I was kind of always against like getting just expansion for Power Five's sake. Like in terms of like the championship, people don't realize it, but the national championship, it doesn't mean anything. It's not even an NCAA championship. Everyone gets all bent out of shape over UCF claiming it. Guess what? It's in the NCAA rulebook. Like the playoff means jack shit because they're not involving all the teams. And so that's where I think they're looking at it. And like you brought up the conference strength, I think it was really highlighted this year. And I know they played like a shortened season. There were no interconference games really. But like the ACC technically gets two teams in, Notre Dame and Clemson. They both get killed in the playoffs. Like the combined like margin of victory of both those games ended up being 38 points. Like no one was interested in them. Ratings tanked. And then you took two spots from potentially a Big 12 school, maybe a Pac-12 school. You don't know who deserves to be there. So 4 really kind of just highlights it. I know a lot of people come back and they say like, oh, looking back through history, they got it right. They got it right. No, they didn't. You don't know if those were the 4 best teams because you don't know what the cutoff's going to be. The number 1 team has only won the championship twice. I mean, we also have 2 4 seeds that have won it. So, like, if you're going back through, if you already have that many 4 seeds in, like, what has it been, 7 years? How do you know that a 5th seed, a 6th seed, a 7th seed wouldn't win 1 or 2? You don't. You don't know. You can't say that, like, all Alabama was undefeated. They're head and shoulders above everyone. They're going to win. How many times have they lost to Auburn in the past decade? Seems like they lose to them every other year. And
they're gonna beat them more now that Malzahn's out.
Well, I'm just saying, like, you don't know who's going to get that kick 6. What if the kick 6 game was a playoff game, and like it was like the old Statue of Liberty with like was Boise State beating them? Didn't they beat them, or did they beat Oklahoma? I can't remember.
Oklahoma.
So like that's another big time matchup, and you're like, okay, well maybe we're onto something here. And so that's where, if you go to 6 teams, you're going to have the same bullshit that you have now. Because now, like, who's getting the bye? Who's getting that bye? You have, like, Alabama and Clemson already getting a bye. And then Clemson gets killed in their next game. Like, let's say if they would have got the bye this year and then Ohio State comes up and crushes them 49-28. Everyone's going to be like, oh, well, maybe they shouldn't have got the bye. And the year before, it wasn't a beatdown, but Clemson number 3 beat number 2 Ohio State. Why did Ohio State get that bye? Because they were in the Big Ten? Like, no one knows. I think 6 is the worst possible outcome because I think what they're looking at is they're like, we just need to expand it a little bit, and they're going to slowly expand it over time. And so we're going to have like 8 more years of bullshit where you have like 6 teams. So like if they jump right to 8, I think you're a little bit better because then you at least have all of the Power 5 conferences, and then I would hope that at that point they guarantee a non-Power 5 team in. And I don't mean independent. Like, screw them. Like, Notre Dame shouldn't be able to steal that spot. Like, they should steal the spot from the ACC or whatever team they have an agreement with. They should not steal it from Cincinnati or some other team, BYU. Like, I guess BYU is independent right now. But, like, let's say if that deal happened, I bet they would go back to the Mountain West or whatever. Like, that's the way it should fall. Because I think, like, if you're going to go out there And then again, you have the same problem. If you go to 10 or 12, if you're not involving the other small schools, why do it? Why? Like if you go to 12 and you still only have one group of 5 team in, who cares? Why are you having those other teams? Like, do they deserve to be in it? I mean, hell, if you went to 12, Michigan would be in it a decent amount, I feel like, especially with Harbaugh there. Like, they're always right there, ranked somewhere. And you're like, do they even deserve to be there, man? Like, after they get beat by Ohio State, how far do they fall each year? I was like, all right. I know I saw a list where they would have been in it like twice or 3 times by now. It's like, okay, cool. Would that have changed it? No, they're still losing their bowl games. What would be the difference if it was a playoff game? Maybe for recruiting, but like you can't tell me that they deserve to be in over like some other smaller school like a Cincinnati this year. Like you just can't tell me that. And it would be even more of a joke if Notre Dame was like, "Hey, sorry, Cincinnati, we're kicking you out so that we can let Ole Miss in this year," or like some other random SEC team. It's like, all right, that's bullshit. So I think 16 would be it. I will hope they go right to 16. I hope that they make all conferences get an auto bid, and I hope that it becomes an NCAA championship. And I know the football schools don't want that, and that's why they're talking about a super conference. So what the super conference would be is the big money schools, and Sporting News put together a list of like 15 teams that they would get most of the money. So like right now, you have each conference has their money makers. Texas, they get all the money from the Big 12. Guess what? They don't even split it. They don't even share it. That's how greedy they are. So they would be one of them. I don't know what order they have this in. They would be in there. You'd have the money maker from the SEC. You'd have Alabama, LSU, Georgia, possibly Florida, Auburn. I don't even know if I'd have Auburn in there because they're small enough where I don't think that they're going to bring the money into it. They're talking about championships in their list too. But I think you're just looking at which schools bringing the money. Then Notre Dame would, of course, be in there as independent right now. Go to the Big Ten, you have Ohio State, Michigan, possibly Penn State. They have kind of on the border because they have enough wins, but they don't have enough like power. And they're one of the ones with Georgia I didn't realize it's been like 30 years. Georgia, Notre Dame, Penn State. I was talking about teams that haven't won it in a long time. They're in that list now, which seems crazy. And I think they should just claim 1994. Why not? Why not? You're undefeated. You're letting people talk about how you used to be good, and they're forgetting all about 1994, man. But that's another Penn State rant. The one thing that stood out to me is like in the Big 12, you have Oklahoma and you have Texas in. The ACC really only has Clemson right now, which, let's be honest, if it wasn't for the playoffs, they wouldn't even be anywhere near this list. So there's a little bit of recency bias because I don't think Clemson brings in the money. Florida State was definitely, you would say Florida State and Miami. Miami's kind of fallen off too. I don't know if they would be part of like the big money part where you're guaranteed at least a spot in the playoffs if you have like a so-and-so record, which is still going to be kind of bullshit to the smaller teams. And then, of course, the Pac-12, they only have USC in, and they have them in as a borderline pick. They would have to let a West Coast team in. They're not going to make a playoffs with only the East Coast teams. That would just be asinine. I mean, look at the NCAA. Look at the basketball tournament this year. It was mostly West Coast teams. You're going to tell me that Oregon and USC are going to be out of that? Like, give me a break. Just in terms of money, Oregon's in. I don't care what their record is. Oregon would be one of the money teams, and USC would be the other one. So that's your pick. Give or take, there's been some talk about, what if there are teams in multiple states, like the Auburn, Alabama. I don't even know which other states have multiple teams. Not too many. Texas? No, I don't think we mentioned multiple teams in Texas. So I just don't see how something like that is going to work. Like the NCAA is trying to walk this line where they want to keep these money teams happy. All they have to do is take over just like the basketball league. Like, don't do the Super League. Don't worry about those teams breaking away. Because a lot of those big teams guess what? They're also getting their money from all the other sports. Like the same teams that are making money in football are now making money in basketball. They're making money in softball. And people are like, oh, there's not that much money in softball. That's because all the big boys take it. They're selling out stadiums for baseball. They're selling out wrestling stadiums. Like, you can't tell me that Iowa loses money on wrestling that. Like, that's just crazy. Even NC State down here has a full wrestling gym that's packed with people buying tickets or whatever. Like, they make money off that. If you're good at a sport, you're going to make money off it, whether it's one of the big two or not. And if you're getting the extra football money, great. So my thing is go right to 16, give all the other conferences auto bids, but do the payouts just like the NCAA tournament where they give you units or whatever. So like if your team wins, so like if the Big Ten gets 2 teams in, or however what they get in the basketball tournament this year, 8 ton of teams in, and they all lost if it wasn't for Michigan carrying that conference banner, getting them a few more units, they wouldn't have got paid out, Matt. They would have just got however many units their teams were in. Perfect. And so I think that's the way around this. You look at it and you say, all right, there's 10 conferences. That's the limit. We're not going to allow another conference to be made. So you get 5 credits, 1 for each conference, and then 5 credits for the group of 5. There are 6 other spots where each Power 5 conference can technically set themselves up for two payouts. So they're going to make double the money of the smaller conferences. I don't see how that's a lose-lose. And then you're thinking that your conference is better than these other conferences. They should win those games, right? So then you're guaranteed like probably triple the money for each of the Power 5 conferences. Is it a fair system? No. Is there a possibility that maybe a Boise team gets on a few-year run and then they steal an at-large bid a couple of years away from one of the power conferences? Possibly. Would that be a negative? No. I also think that bullshit Notre Dame does would be ended exactly like this. Because once they see that you're going to get an extra payout from the playoffs and they don't have an automatic path to get in, they'll be joining the ACC immediately. They'd probably make the announcement the exact same day. They'd be like, hey, welcome, guys. Hey, remember us? Remember those 2 payouts we got for the college football playoffs? Like, that was fun. Should we do that again? Come on, let us in. Let us in, please. Or they would try to join one of the smaller conferences, hoping that they could just Texas their way into more money, which would be even funnier if they joined like Conference USA, or that's a conference still, right? And they're like, you know what? Or the MAC. And they say, you know what? We're going to just win the MAC every year, get that auto bid, and we're not going to share it like Texas does. It works for them, except whenever they lose to Oklahoma every year. So it's a perfect system. Not really. You're still going to have people complaining, but at least at this point, some of the more familiar teams that you've seen get in, because like even on their list, going back through and like trying to calculate which teams have like the best records and stuff, you're still looking at possibly including a BYU or a Boise or an Appalachia State. Why not just give them a chance by winning their conference to be in every year anyway? Be the Gonzaga of college football. People don't even watch college football, but they would cheer for Boise State back in the day. Give them a chance to do that again by putting them in the playoffs. And once the playoffs started, everyone kind of forgot. Boise State plays into a BCS bowl. No one cares. UCF beats Auburn. People only cared because they claimed the national championship. If they just went back and said like, oh, we're Cotton Bowl champs or whatever that bowl was, no one would have even remembered that they won that match. So that's my thing. Why go ahead and cater the entire system to a couple of schools because they used to win football games all the time? Like Nebraska, like if they're going to put them in there, like, all right, cool. What have you guys done lately? Nothing. How's recruiting going? Oh, Rutgers is beating you guys now? Oh, that's interesting. Scott Frost, what's your record looking like? Poor. But they're going to be like, you know what, though? The NCAA has decided to give you guys extra money because you're Nebraska. That would make 0 sense. Just go to 16 teams. Go to 16 teams. That's my final thing. As you heard my thing, what do you think about that?
I can buy into it. I I think it makes sense, and definitely the one thing above all that I want it to be is I want there to be the best teams playing and being represented. I don't want it just to be that, like, the to me and I say this across conferences, but I don't want it to be where it's like, oh, our conference is so much better that we automatically guarantee we get 2 spots or 3 spots because our number 3 team's better than your number 1 team. Like, in certain situations, maybe, but I hate like the argument that consistently you get like from the SEC, where it's like, well, Alabama's automatically in, and Texas A&M is automatically in, and then like there's always a team like an Auburn or like a Georgia that's always on the fringe that they're like, well, that team is even better than everyone in the MAC and everyone that's better in the Big 12. So they should have a third team. It's like they need to just have the best ones available, like the best teams being represented in the playoffs, and not just having it so saturated from one conference because of these hyped up, like, for whatever reason, the additional exposure. So they kind of force it onto people.
Well,
I
I think
like the
that's
idea that
where it is a lot of hype, but I think if you get rid of, I think where it really starts to happen is in the middle, like the teens. But if you get rid of that by having the conference champs in, like since I'm looking at the rankings from last year, Cincinnati in, Coastal Carolina in, let's say BYU in. They took like the West Coast Conference, like because I know they really wouldn't be in. But then you have like San Jose State, and then what's the other one? Tulsa or Louisiana. Like I don't know, some of those might be in the same conference. I can't remember off the top of my head. But there's 5 bids there that you're already diversifying the playoff field that's beyond anything that we've had recently. Like Coastal Carolina getting in, they won a baseball national championship. Would anyone have bet on Coastal Carolina going into that baseball national championship? No. They were in overtime against NC State in the regionals. I was at the game. I don't even think people thought that they would win that game. But they're Coastal Carolina. Now everyone thinks, oh, they must just be a baseball school now. It's like before that run, no one even thought that. No one thought that they would
But I
even
think
go on a run like that. How do you
if you
know
do that though,
what's going to be
if
like
you
basketball?
do
I don't think they would win the national championship. But what if they go on a run and get to the Final Four? Because a lot of the smaller conferences, that's their barometer of success. Like Gonzaga, Final Four was awesome for them. But after they made a few, now it's like, okay, now we have to win a national championship to be successful. And that's great for them. But how do you know Coastal Carolina or an App State or Boise State, they're not going to reach that level? Because if they're in the playoffs every year, I think then you have a very good point for recruits where you're saying, like, look at all our hardware. We're in the playoffs. Why would you go play for Miami? Like, come to UCF. Like, are you kidding me? Miami hasn't been relevant in like 2 decades, dude. Like, if I was a coach, I think it'd be very easy to recruit against that. Like, same with Coastal Carolina. It's like, who am I recruiting against? Teams that haven't won the conference. But just looking at this, I think last year you would have been kind of having that debate. But like, I don't even think that they would put a bunch of SEC teams in because you'd have 6 available. I think A&M gets in. Then you would have possibly Florida or Georgia. But I think Iowa State would be in. Indiana would be in. Possibly that's where you get down and you're like, maybe Northwestern, maybe Iowa, maybe Florida, maybe Georgia. And so I think you start to see these other conferences. North Carolina's in that mix too. They had 1 extra loss though. Miami only had 2 losses. USC would probably get in, although they might have been the Pac-12 champs, so they might have been in anyway. Miami's right there with 2 losses. I think the debate is a lot better once you get to that level. Like debating like, oh, Alabama has to be number 1 because of all these SEC teams. If it's an auto bid, people are going to say like, okay, they won the conference, no big deal, they're in. If they end up losing that game, no harm, no foul. Like they can still be in as an at-large. I don't think people would worry about that. But that's where I think you could do seeding like the NCAA basketball tournament. Like take the lessons you learned with that and apply it to football. Does it have to go in order with all the Power 5 conference champs? No. If Alabama's 11-1, a non-conference champ, and because they lost in the conference championship game, they're not going to be seated at number 10 or 11, whatever the hell it would be. They're going to be seated at like number 1 or 2 where they deserve to be. And so that's where you're going to get a lot of these other ones. They're going to be playing the Coastal Carolinas, the Louisianas. And if they can't take playing them in the first round, like why give them a bye? That's my big argument. Why go to 6 or 10 and give them a bye? Why not let the smaller guys play? Are you afraid Alabama's going to lose? Because you're getting an extra game for TV, so you're going to get an extra payout. If they get a bye, they don't get the payout. There's no payout for a bye. And that's what this comes down to is money. Like there's no TV deal that shows the 2 bye teams sitting around on ESPN and people watch it. Like no one would watch that. But hell, if Louisiana and Alabama's on like New Year's or whatever, and it's a close game, people would be tuned in. And I saw some people say get rid of the conference championship games. I don't even think you have to do that. I would like them to get rid of it and just go to a pod system where maybe you play like one extra round of games where you have like a pod champion. And I don't know if you can I don't even know what you'd call it, like co-champs or whatever.
You and your damn pods.
But I think you could have, then you would have a pure conference champion, Matt. Because last year, Clemson and Notre Dame played, awesome. They were the top 2 teams in the ACC. But how many other conferences don't have that? Like in a pod system, theoretically, the conference championship game could have been Alabama versus Texas A&M instead of them playing Florida or Georgia, whichever team they ended up playing. I can't remember. Because now they're playing the second best team in their conference, and guess what? It doesn't really hurt them. Because A&M wouldn't be in Alabama's pod. It would be like A&M, Arkansas, LSU, and Missouri or someone like that. Alabama's would be like them, Auburn, Tennessee, Vanderbilt maybe. I don't know which teams are all close. I guess maybe you'd have the Ole Misses in there. So maybe it'd be Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Alabama, and Auburn. Like, why not? Then at least you can pick and you can have a first and second place game and a third and fourth place game. 2 more games, 2 more TV deals, Matt. Could you imagine?
Well, the issue that I have with you going to that pod system is you're looking at trying to roughly put within a conference teams that are going to be relevant. And
no.
I know we've been critical on this before, but I think if you're expanding the playoffs and you're allowing more people in, you're not going to eat yourself alive, and you can do what the Big 12's doing, where they just have where it's more open and your top 2 teams are going to play for your conference championship. And this is one of the reasons that I think you do, because right now with the way that the conferences are aligned, you take a school like you have Florida State and you have Clemson that are in the Atlantic, that it's pretty much come down to the winner of that side of the ACC wins the conference. With Michigan and Ohio State, they're on the same side of the pod. That whoever wins that side has typically gone on to win the Big Ten for the most part. So I think in doing that, it almost handcuffs you, because then it boils down to you lose that game. If Michigan loses to Ohio State or Ohio State loses to Michigan, well then that knocks you out of the championship game, and then that takes away any possibility of that playoff seed. Where I think if you follow more of a format like what the Big 12 has, it's going to create a scenario for you to, on a short week, come back and replay your rival. But I think it also is going to give you that opportunity to have your best 2 teams, regardless of what side of the conference you're in. You're playing the best of the best.
Now, see, I think that's old school thinking. My pod system is to give you flexibility in scheduling and to create, to get more hype. Because using the Big Ten, as an example, I think you split up your power teams. Like you try to keep some of them together, but like you have at least a champion in each one. Like I would keep Ohio State and Michigan together because like you said, historically, you don't want them to knock each other out. So in my scenario, they would be in the same pod with like possibly Indiana and Illinois or someone like that. Someone that historically just hasn't been there in football. And for them, okay, you're looking at it and you're going to say, all right, they're going to play each other. You know, at the end of the year, Michigan's going to play Ohio State. The winner of that game is most likely going to win that pod. That's just the way it is. And then they're potentially there for the Big Ten championship. But you also look at like the combined records or whatever. And then I would throw in an Eastern pod with Michigan State, Penn State, Rutgers, and Maryland. And you say like, look, Michigan State and Penn State, they've been competitive, but maybe some years they're not. Maybe in their crossover games, they end up shitting the bed and they have like both have 5 losses. So then maybe the champion is Ohio State versus Wisconsin then. Or like last year, they played what, Northwestern or someone, when they could have played Indiana. And I know I'm throwing Indiana in their pod, so maybe it wouldn't work out. I didn't try to draw these up. But I think instead of Michigan playing Minnesota once every 8 years, which is ridiculous, in a pod system, you play each other pod every 3 years you're playing teams. So you're going to get to see your entire conference a lot faster just because you're going to get to play the other pod. And then it gives you some flexibility in non-conference scheduling because there's not as many conference games then. You can have your rivals if you want to have crossover games, but guess what? You don't have to. Like, you're not forced to it. Because I know they tried to draw it up before where, like, if Michigan's going to play Michigan State every year, awesome. And if they play that pod, maybe they switch and they play Minnesota or Wisconsin, like some other big rival, a second time. Okay? I think it gives you a little bit more of a traditional schedule without re-shrinking the conference like the Big 12 did. Because now the Big 12 is killing themselves. Everyone plays each other. You don't have the potential for a one-loss team playing a one-loss team like in the championship most of the time. Like last year it was Oklahoma with 2 losses, Iowa State with 2 losses or whatever it ended up being. And like that was their championship game. No one cared. Like last year, you could have had a pod with Ohio State on top. Then you could have had the West one with like Northwestern. And then you could have had one with Iowa on top if Indiana was in Ohio State's pod. So then potentially they could have played the best of the best. And then the third place game, the Iowa game versus Indiana or whatever it ended up being, maybe that pushes Iowa or Indiana into the playoffs then. Because you're giving yourself one other option to try to get 2 teams in. I think the goal would be in a 16-team playoff for your conference to try to get 2 teams in. 3 would be good, but I think more times than not, you just want to make sure you're going to get 2 teams in to try to get those extra payouts. Penn State, they weren't there last year. Michigan wasn't there last year. Okay, my pod system is going to give Northwestern and Iowa a chance, along with Indiana, to try to get that last spot. And I think they would have got 3 teams in last year. Whoever would have won, like let's say Ohio State beats Northwestern, Indiana doesn't play in the championship game, they get in because they're 6-1, and then Iowa wins the third place game, and they also get in at 15. Perfect. Like I think you're going to have newer teams in, and you're going to have more options, but we're going pretty long, so we can get back into this in the summer. I'll try to have some more concrete ideas to kind of help explain it. But I think that would be, if it was my idea, instead of the big teams breaking off and playing the same 15 teams every year, that's not fun. Like at some point, people are going to tune out because they're going to say, why am I not just watching the NFL on Sunday? I'm dedicating 2 weekends to watch this. No, it's not going to happen. So that's my final bell. You have anything else on anything?
Nope.
All right.
Check in and enjoy the draft.
Got the draft coming up. And then in the summer, we'll start to go through, once we see rosters, we'll go through some NFL predictions and stuff. And then we'll some college football. Maybe they'll have a little bit more guidance coming out, but that's what I'm hoping. And at least I'll put my dream system. Maybe we'll take a few weeks over the summer and go through it. But thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.